Managing difficult employees and handling difficult conversations. So in your experience, what's the most common mistakes that business owners, employers make when dealing with these conflict situations?
The key one is they don't address situations early enough. Meaning they allow things to escalate, fester, meaning that you have to take things more seriously later on. Other colleagues feel as if one employee is getting away with murder, and they begin to resent it, and the whole culture breaks down. And when then you try and address it, you're addressing it too late, and it then becomes very difficult to manage at that point. So yeah, the biggest issue is that we don't deal with things early enough, and promptly enough in order to solve it and nip it in the bud.
Yeah, and I guess you picked up on it, obviously, for majority of our members, they're going to be really small, sort of small businesses with 4 or 5 members of a team.
Yeah.
And as you said, that could really be picked up quite quickly.
Yeah.
Discussions, over the wash basin and the various areas of the room. So why do you think these mistakes happen so frequently?
Yeah. Well,
in small businesses.
Yeah. Well, for the precise reason that you've said, they are small, and there's the barriers between employer and employee often tend to be get much more blurred in that scenario. You tend to get very friendly with your employer and your manager, and you sometimes forget that that's exactly what they are, and that it's a manager-employee relationship. And then the manager thinks, oh well, I certainly don't want to ruin that relationship, so I'm sure it'll be fine, and they don't mention it, and then things get worse, and then it just becomes much more difficult to manage it. Whereas in a larger organization, those barriers and those kind of the hierarchy is much stronger, so people do feel more have a license to say, right, I'm going to be firm and I'm going to bring this up, because sometimes that friendship's just not quite there so much.
Sure.
Whereas a small family business, there might be friends of friends, there might have been your friend's son or your friend's daughter that you employed, and you don't want to mention it. So I can understand why people don't raise things early enough. So it's not a case of beating people over the head and saying, why do you deal with this earlier? I can understand it. It's just that if you want to deal with things properly, it doesn't help the situation at all.
Doesn't help. So practical techniques, what techniques can employees use to approach these conversations? How can the salon owner prepare themselves for that conversation? Who do they call?
Yeah.
Who are you going to call? And what does a well-structured and fair sort of process look like in short terms? Obviously, as I say, the support's there from the helpline, but just really quick sort of short terms.
Yeah. So if you're phoning us and saying, look, I don't think this is going to be an issue yet, but I just wanted to put it on your radar and just kind of make you aware of it, that's great for us, because it's meaning that you're on it early. We can discuss it. You can discuss it with us. We can give you a few pointers, and we can say, well, actually, no, I think this is actually a fairly easy thing for you to solve, and maybe ask this question and do that. So the first thing I would say is call us, call yourselves, get to talk it through. We can kind of give you pointers on it. But if you think, I don't think I'm maybe making a mountain out of a molehill here, that's actually a good thing, because it means you're dealing with it early before it's got too much. And it also allows you to go into a meeting with your employee and keep it quite light, because nobody likes to go in and feel as if they're being accused of anything. So if you can keep it light and say, look, I've just noticed this, can we solve it? Or, I've noticed that maybe your sickness absence has gone up a little bit. Is there anything I can help you with? Rather than going, you've been off for 40 days in the last 12 months. This is appalling. You can, if you nip it in the bud early, that helps, keeps it light, and smaller issues are easier to manage. And another point I would make is, don't leave things to appraisals or scheduled one-to-ones to deal with them.
No.
If you're leaving it to an appraisal to deal with it, you're probably dealing with it too late, because it was several months ago this happened, and the employee will naturally say, well, why didn't you speak to me about this several months ago? And often by that point it's escalated. So don't think, oh, well, that's an appraisal issue. Deal with it now, deal with it informally. So by the time the appraisal comes, or the scheduled one-to-one comes, you can say, spoke to you about this last week, or it's last month, or 6 weeks ago, and pleased to say we've resolved it. I can put a tick in that box, so the employee can leave the room feeling as if they've actually, it's a positive thing rather than a negative thing. So that's what I'd say. Phone us first. We can give you your pointers, deal with it early, and don't wait for appraisals, because that's when people feel they're just getting battered over the head for the last 6 months worth of issues, when actually if you dealt with it early, those things that doesn't arise.
Shouldn't happen. Great stuff. So preventing escalation.
Yeah.
How do they spot the early warning signs? I suppose some of these things also come up into sickness absence, which comes through to the employment rights sort of changes really as well. There's lots of different scenarios. But how do you spot the warning signs that there's issues developing? What does documentation? What role does documents have in that? Obviously, we've talked about policies and procedures and things as well. So can you give us a little bit more about that one?
Yeah. So in terms of spotting the early warning signs, I remember when I was a student and I was kind of studying this in the first instance, my lecturer at the time said, everything that you deal with in HR and employment law is a symptom of something else. Rarely is high sickness absence just because your staff happen to be sicker than everyone else. It's either a symptom internally, or there's something externally that's causing it, because it always tends to be that issue that the same people are always sick and some people are never, but it's often a symptom of something else. So if you can go away and try and find out what those symptoms are, that's something you can address, rather than just pulling out a policy and saying, well, this person's met a trigger point, I'm going to give them a warning. If you start seeing that somebody's absence has ticked up, or their attitude maybe has changed slightly, or that they used to be quite good friends with the rest of their staff and now there seems to be a little bit of aggro there, don't just say, well, I'm going to start disciplining people left, right and centre, or giving people warnings left, right and centre. We might need to do that subsequently. But if you start looking at it as a symptom of something else, saying, right, I'm going to find out what that symptom is and be a bit of a detective and try and find that out, that's when I think you're likely to get to the root of the problem, rather than just pulling out a policy and procedure thinking I've done my job now. So I think that's the way I would look at it, is to look at everything as a symptom. Don't look at it just at face value and think, well, as long as I'm handing out warnings, I'm managing it properly. Ask questions. Ask questions from a supportive perspective and say, we're here to help you. We do have a duty of care towards you, and come to us, because it might be the fact that people are feeling a little bit insecure about their skills that they have, and they might be feeling a bit of a fish out of water with different employees. There might be things going on at home. So most things can be addressed if we start seeing things as symptoms rather than necessarily things that need to be given warnings, and policies and procedures are there to support the process rather than an end in its own right.
Sure, perfect. So we talked about the early warning signs. So building a healthier culture. What systems or habits you've probably covered quite a few of those already, is a bit of investigation, what the habits that employers can put in place to reduce the likelihood of these.
Yeah, so I think the first one, and we touched on it earlier, is to make sure, certainly in small businesses, that and there is a clear structure and what's the right phrase? Barrier or reporting line between lines of communication between the business owner, the managers, and everyone else. Because I think once everybody just becomes part of one big group, and we forget that, then who's the boss in a way, and that's when things become. That's when you start speaking to your business owner in a way that you really shouldn't be speaking to them. You start expecting things just to be done because they're your friend, and you start taking liberties, or you just think, oh well, I'll just text. Rather than phoning in, for example, on the day you might be absent, you end up just sending a text 2 minutes before you're meant to come in because you think, oh, they're my friend, they'll understand. But actually, that's when it spreads, and we've got appointments to make, and that's when things start to break down a little bit.
Yeah.
So that's the first thing. Make sure that, I don't want it to be kind of too dictatorial, but at the same time, we've got to remember that this is a business. There is a hierarchy. There's a hierarchy for a reason. And if you are going to be able to enforce these policies and do them with credibility, people have to know who the boss is and who's making the decisions and why. So that's the first thing. Second thing I would say is ensure that people know the job, enjoy the job, everything becomes routine eventually. Even the person who's, flying the fighter jets eventually probably thinks it becomes a day job. But if you can encourage people to think that this isn't just a 9 to 5, this is a career, this is a business that we want to really drive forward, then I think that prevents people getting a little disillusioned. So get people to buy into something that you're trying to achieve, and that there's something more than just coming in to 9 to 5, seeing your clients and going home again. There's something wider to that. That breeds a loyalty to the business, the loyalty to you as a business owner, and to your colleagues when you're all driving in the same direction. So I think, and the way that we do that is to making it very clear from year to year, quarter to quarter, what our goals are, and what we'd like to achieve. So that's another point. And also in terms of culture, it's consistency, making sure that everybody feels as if they are not being treated differently for one reason or another. Now, there's often examples where people feel they're being treated one way or another, differently to somebody else. You're always going to get that. But provided that you're looking at your documentation and you've got that, you're understanding what would we do last time in the same situation, and you can look back at that, and you can say, well, if I am going to treat somebody differently in this occasion for whatever reason, I can justify it. Because that's when I think disharmony comes in, is when people see that, oh, well, that person got this and I didn't get that, and hang on, they're getting away with murder and I didn't. That happens a lot. So if we can explain to people certain decisions that were made and why, how it fits into the wider structure and goals that we're looking to achieve, and if they've been bought into that culture and that drive to succeed earlier on in the process, you're much more likely to have a scenario where everyone's driving in the same direction and there's a good culture, and if the door's always open to have those conversations and discuss it, then all the better.